double blow for the president. Two former advisors to Donald Trump face jail time after a guilty verdict and a guilty plea. We have the latest. Demanding action. An online petition calling for D.C. Cardinal Donald Wuerl to step down grows after the Pennsylvania grand jury report. World Meeting of Families. Thousands come together in Dublin. We'll have a report on some hot-button topics coming up at the international event.
Thank you all so much.
And a special celebration for one sporty nun. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The White House says President Trump did nothing wrong a day after his former attorney said the president directed him to make hush money payments to two women. Michael Cohen has pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations in 2016. His admission came at nearly the same moment the president's one-time campaign chairman was convicted by a jury. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports on the courtroom drama. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. We're following the last 24 hours of a legal whirlwind. The president says if anyone is looking for a good lawyer, don't hire Michael Cohen, but the damage has been done as the White House goes on the defensive.
As the president has stated on numerous occasions, he did nothing wrong. There are no charges against him in this. And just because Michael Cohen made a plea deal doesn't mean that implicates the president on anything.
That's today's White House response to almost simultaneous courtroom drama that played out on Tuesday. In Virginia, Paul Manafort found guilty of financial crimes he committed before managing the Trump campaign in 2016. And in New York, Michael Cohen, the president's former personal attorney, pleading guilty to violating 2016 campaign finance law in coordination and at the direction of a candidate for federal office. Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, spells out the bombshell his client dropped in court.
Donald Trump directed him to commit a crime, making Donald Trump as much guilty of that felony as my client, Mr. Cohen.
Cohen is claiming a campaign cover-up to buy the silence of women who said they had affairs with Donald Trump before he was elected. The president says no crime was committed, and using Twitter, he shows sympathy for Manafort and disdain for Cohen. I feel very badly for Paul Manafort and his wonderful family. Justice took a 12-year-old tax case, among other things, applied tremendous pressure on him, and unlike Michael Cohen, he refused to make up stories in order to get a deal. Such respect for a brave man. And the president continuing criticism of the ongoing Russia probe last night in West Virginia.
Where is the collusion? You know, they're still looking for collusion. Where is the collusion?
The work of Robert Mueller's investigation into possible ties between Russia and the Trump campaign eventually led to Cohen's guilty plea and Manafort's conviction. Now Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer warns Donald Trump not to use presidential authority to help former allies.
He better not talk about pardons for Michael Cohen or Paul Manafort tonight or any time in the future.
And now we're hearing from House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. She says impeaching President Donald Trump is not a priority unless something else comes forward. She says she prefers for Democrats, if they win the House in November, to conduct oversight and ensure special counsel Robert Mueller can finish his work. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thanks, Mark. Joining me now is Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Hans, welcome back to the program. How bad is this for President Trump? Does Cohen's guilty plea mean the president violated the law?
No, I don't think so, and I say that as a former commissioner on the Federal Election Commission. Look, Cohen pled guilty to a supposed campaign finance violation for making payments that I guess you could call hush money to two women who claimed they'd had affairs with the president when he was not a president. The problem is that that theory that this was a campaign-related expense, that's a dubious theory under campaign finance laws. And remember, the government tried this theory once before. Remember the prosecution of John Edwards, former Democratic presidential candidate, when campaign contributors paid $1 million to his mistress. The government lost that case, and I think most experts would say this was not a campaign finance violation.
Okay, so then, Hans, clarify for me, what exactly is the law?
Well, what Cohen pleaded guilty to was making a contribution to the campaign that was above the limit, and also for making a corporate contribution, because apparently corporate funds were used to make these payments. But all of that is only a violation of the law if it was a campaign-related expense. And that's where the government's theory fails. Like I said, if they actually tried to prosecute Cohen instead of scaring him into a guilty plea, I actually think they would have lost in court the same way they lost when they tried that theory against John Edwards.
Okay, so then if there's any evidence of wrongdoing of any kind, can the president be indicted?
No, the longtime opinion of the U.S. Justice Department under both Democratic and Republican administrations is that a sitting president cannot be criminally charged or indicted.
Well, as you know, speculation about impeachment is increasing. How realistic is that? And can you impeach a president for illegal activity that occurred before he became president?
Well, look, in essence, impeachment is a political offense, not a legal offense. And it's whatever members of the House and then the U.S. Senate believe are grounds for impeachment. So, yes, that could happen. But unless the makeup of the current Congress changes, I don't think there's any chance of impeachment being successful.
How does Cohen's plea relate to the Mueller investigation, or does it?
Well, it doesn't really relate to the Mueller investigation. Now, Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, has been hinting that his client knows more and is going to be saying more, but we don't really have any evidence of what he might have that could possibly be relevant to the Russian collusion investigation. And the guilty plea didn't have anything to do with that.
Okay, so many important topics here and ones that we're going to continue to cover on our program. Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Republican Representative Duncan Hunter of California and his wife Margaret were indicted yesterday on use of $250,000 in campaign funds for personal expenses. Prosecutors say the couple used funds to buy trips to Italy and Hawaii, pay for dental work for their family, their children's tuition, and travel for nearly a dozen relatives. Hunter has maintained his innocence throughout the Department of Justice investigation. 50,000 people signed an online petition asking Pope Francis to remove Cardinal Donald Wuerl, Archbishop of Washington, from his position. It comes as a Pennsylvania grand jury report says he protected predator priests, but some Catholics are defending him and questioning efforts to remove him. Correspondent Jason Calvi spoke with the woman who started the petition. He joins us now. Hey, Jason.
Wyatt, Winnie OBK is a wife, mother of 2 boys, and a grad student at the University of Maryland. She's also running for the Maryland State House. But Winnie says she created this online petition 6 days ago as a concerned faithful Catholic. I spoke to her earlier today.
It is shaking the core of our Catholic faith. It is shaking the core of our being. So if the Cardinal can understand that, I think he would step down.
I know this is deeply emotional for you. As we look at Cardinal Wuerl's record, though, in Pittsburgh, he did remove 18 of 19 priests where the abuse arose during his time as bishop.
Yeah, he could have done more. He could have done more. You know, the Church of Jesus Christ is called to be perfect. Jesus said, "Be perfect as my Heavenly Father is perfect." So we expected more leadership from him, and his failure to lead, his failure to act with moral courage, that's the language in the petition.
This idea of a petition, some people say this is not the appropriate method to bring your concerns to the Holy Father.
We were very measured and respectful of the Cardinal in that appeal, in this appeal to Pope Francis, asking him to please withdraw, to please step down for the sake of the faith of the faithful.
Let me read you a selection from your petition. In this Me Too era, it is unconscionable that a cardinal who played a role in the conspiracy of silence and cover-up of clergy abuse of minors should remain in leadership.
I'm really paying homage to the victims, people who have been abused. You've heard the saying that hurt people hurt people. So if you've been abused yourself, it's more likely that you will abuse other people.
I pressed Winnie on referring to the Me Too movement because one of the prominent leaders of that movement has been accused herself of abusing a teen. As for the Cardinal, sources tell me Wuerl has no plans to step down. He did submit his resignation letter in 2015 when he reached the mandatory age of 75, as is the custom. But Pope Francis has so far not accepted it. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. The head of the Knights of Columbus writes a letter to members of the group and their chaplains about the abuse scandals in Pennsylvania and by former Washington, D.C. Archbishop Theodore McCarrick. Carl Anderson, the Supreme Knight, writes, Archbishop McCarrick and others at fault owe us a full account of their actions, motivations, and cover-ups. After years of having us confess to them, it is now time for them to come clean about what they have done and what they have failed to do. In the letter, Anderson also announced a national tour of the relic of St. John Vianney will start in November. Vianney is patron of priests and will be sponsored by the Knights, who also support this program. Nearly 40,000 people from 116 countries are represented at this year's World Meeting of Families, but the clergy sex abuse scandal is casting a shadow over the international conference. Today at a press conference, Cardinal Kevin Farrell did not answer questions about the abuse crisis. At the end of July, he claimed he never knew or even suspected that his former boss, Theodore McCarrick, allegedly abused boys and adult seminarians. Farrell is the head of the Vatican's Department for Laity, Family, and Life, and the highest-ranking American in the Holy See. Tracy Harkin of EWTN Ireland joins us from Dublin. She's covering the World Meeting of Families for the network. Tracy, there is a keynote address each day in Dublin. Today, Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington was scheduled to deliver that address, but he canceled his appearance. Archbishop Eamon Martin of Armagh and the Primate of all Ireland took his place. What was his message?
Archbishop Eamon Martin gave a wonderful address today, Wyatt. It was a very uplifting one. He actually began his speech with a beautiful theme song from the World Meeting of Families.
The joy of love, a joy for all God's family.
In terms of the key message, there were many beautiful things that he said about the gospel of the family, joy for the world, which was the theme of today. He talked about how the family is that basic cell of society, and if that cell is healthy, then the whole nation will be healthy. He talked about how public policy needs to recognise the importance of the family and how this message of the family is actually very countercultural now in Ireland and around the world to proclaim. But we still need to do it with clarity and with charity.
Reporters asked tough questions during this morning's press conference, including about ministry to Catholics with same-sex attraction. What did church leaders say, and how are participants reacting?
Well, Cardinal Farrell and Diarmuid Martin, Archbishop of Dublin, responded to questions regarding alienation of the LGBT community and, accusations that the church wasn't doing enough to welcome members with same-sex attraction of the church. They responded emphasising that there were two workshops on LGBT issues over the course of the 3 days Congress. They also talked about the church welcoming everybody and about building bridges. But there was some mixed reaction to the response. Wyatt, it was felt that they didn't go the next step and talk about the importance of, yes, welcome, the importance, yes, of building bridges, but also the importance of bringing people into a church that's leading them towards the truth of family, the truth of marriage, and God's plan for love and sexuality in marriage. So I think some people felt today on speaking around the arena after that conference that that was an important omission on behalf of both Cardinal Farrell and Diarmuid Martin today.
As I mentioned, you are covering this event for the network. Events there are in full swing in Dublin, I can tell by looking behind you. What are you hearing from the participants?
Well, I think there is such a wonderful buzz today in Dublin, and the crowds, really the immensity of the crowds is quite overwhelming. There's 40,000 people from 116 countries that are attending this world meeting. You can see behind me hundreds of outreach ministries on display in the little booths behind me. So very much the scale of it. The atmosphere is a very positive one. Just listening to the many accents around the world, just the enthusiasm that people have for family and the importance of family today is really coming across already in this first day of the Congress, Wyatt.
Okay, and we'll continue to follow you all week long and throughout the weekend. Tracy Harkin, EWTN Ireland. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Pope Francis says he is looking forward to his visit to Ireland.
Per l'incontro mondiale delle famiglie invio un'affettuosa parola di saluto.
The Holy Father mentions the challenges facing families today and says young people are the future. He'll be in Ireland for the World Meeting of Families Saturday and Sunday. A man from Mexico living in the U.S. illegally confesses to kidnapping college student Molly Tibbetts in her small Iowa hometown, killing her and dumping her body in a cornfield.
We have confirmed with Homeland Security investigations that he is an illegal alien, and we believe he has been in this area now for 4 to 7 years.
24-year-old Christian Rivera is charged with first-degree murder in the death of Tibbetts, whose disappearance set off a massive search. Investigators used surveillance video to track down Rivera. Tibbetts was a psychology major at the University of Iowa. The 20-year-old would have started her junior year this week. Violent clashes stained the Muslim holiday of Eid in the northern India today. Indian security forces fired tear gas and guns to disperse anti-India protests. The Indian-controlled area of Kashmir has seen renewed rebel attacks against Indian rule in the past several years. Both India and Pakistan claim the territory. Rebels want it to be either united under Pakistani rule or as an independent country. Nearly 200 South Koreans returned home today after spending 3 days with relatives in North Korea. They embraced each other during the heart-wrenching reunion. It comes after a 3-year hiatus by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un of family visitations. South Korea is pushing for more family encounters. Pope Francis tells Catholic lawmakers from around the world they must defend religious freedom. The EWTN Rome Bureau caught up with an American congressman who was there. He says religious freedom is key to any democracy.
It's what must inform the build-out of just governance space. It's what must inform the proper functioning of market-based systems. It's what must inform the new architecture, if you will, of 21st century international relations if we are to save ourselves.
Representative Jeff Fortenberry, a Republican from Nebraska, says the lawmaker will focus on persecution of religious minorities during their meetings just outside of Rome over the next 3 days. Coming up, a Dominican priest and author of an article called Cleansing the Church of Clerical Sacrilege talks about his reaction to the sex abuse crisis. U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Callista Gingrich, meets with Vatican Secretary of State Pietro Parolin this morning. She was joined by Sam Brownback, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. They discussed advancing and defending religious liberty. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A Dominican priest and professor of theology in Washington, D.C., says the shameful sexual sins and crimes of clergy, including cardinals, bishops, and priests, can no longer be tolerated. Father Dominic Legg writes in First Things, the persistent problem is with homosexually active priests. They protect and promote their own and others who will tolerate them. They become a major problem when they insinuate themselves into positions of power, as occurred in the case of Theodore McCarrick. Father Dominic joins us now. Welcome, Father.
Thanks for having me.
Father, this is obviously a very sensitive subject. I know it may scandalize some faithful Catholics, so we should clarify that the Church asks all of us, lay and clergy, to live chastity. How did this happen, do you think?
Well, I think it's been a long time in coming, actually. You might go back to the sexual revolution and the way that's affected culture at large and the Catholic Church as well, even within the priesthood, as we're discovering, that there has been a kind of lowering of standards, and you might say a kind of toleration of unchaste behavior. And I think, in fact, there's been a kind of unspoken détente between some people among the laity who might not want the Church speaking about sexuality so much, and the Church's own internal practice of maintaining priestly celibacy and priestly chastity, where priests are trying to live a kind of holy, chaste life. And because we have become, you might say, tolerant of unchaste acts, now we're reaping the whirlwind.
So what do you think can be done to fix the problem? Is it raising standards? Is it more prayer, accountability?
Well, I think it's important to recognize, and the point of the article that I wrote, that what we're really talking about when we're talking about priestly unchastity are acts that are worse than acts of individual Christians. We're talking about sacrilegious acts because they're taking something very holy, the priesthood, and besmirching it with unchastity. And so the response really is to return to the holiness of the priesthood, the holiness of the episcopacy, the holiness of the church, to recognize that the vocation to be consecrated entirely to Christ as a celibate man is a beautiful one, and that this is what our bishops and priests are supposed to be proclaiming and living in an integral way in their own lives. So maintaining those standards for everyone and holding each other accountable for that kind of profession of faith and profession of life is what is needed.
Your stand is a very courageous one, many may say, and one people may be afraid to articulate in public. What kind of reaction are you getting?
The reaction has been overwhelmingly positive that I've received. Many lay people are simply grateful that we're naming the problem. And the problem isn't just sexual abuse of minors. That is a terrible problem that has to be dealt with and eliminated, of course. But that's one subset of the problem, and the larger problem is a kind of crisis of chastity. And I would also say a crisis in confidence in the power of God's grace. That is, that God's grace really can transform you, can transform me, can transform everyone from the inside out to make us chaste, to make us capable of living the way God calls us. And that's what I think the challenge is.
I think it's pretty clear that lay people who make up some 99% of the church have a role in bringing about reform. What can lay people do?
Well, I think, it's right to talk about a need for reform. And the reform begins with each one of us. It starts at home. In fact, it starts even closer. It starts in our own hearts. So God offers us the grace to be conformed more profoundly to Him. And that calls every Christian to live chastely in marriage, in fidelity to a spouse, chastely as a single person, chastely as a priest who's consecrated in celibacy, my heart consecrated to Jesus alone. And God's grace really can transform us from the inside out. So to pray and to recognize that, reform happens in the church because there are great saints. Where are the saints today? Well, it's time for us to become those saints and to let go of the things that are unworthy of God, unworthy of a Christian vocation, and to begin living the Christian vocation to the full. And that's when we will experience, I think, a real renewal in the religious life of the Catholic Church.
Such an important call to holiness. Father Dominic Legg, Dominican priest and professor of theology in Washington, D.C., thanks so much.
Thank you.
And stay with EWTN News for comprehensive coverage on the abuse scandals. We'll have the latest on EWTN News Nightly, as well as Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register. Up next, visiting an area damaged by Hurricane Harvey nearly 1 year ago. And honor for Sister Jean, the chaplain of the Loyola Chicago basketball team.
Si può vivere una relazione falsa con Dio.
The Holy Father warns the faithful about forging a false relationship with God. He made the comments during his weekly gathering with pilgrims and tourists. The Pope says God never says no to a heart that sincerely invokes Him. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Vice President Mike Pence visits a Baptist church in Rockport, Texas today to mark Hurricane Harvey's 1 year anniversary. Pence toured the town's First Baptist Church and then met with local disaster relief volunteers. The Vice President delivered remarks on recovery efforts. He also spoke about Hurricane Lane heading towards Hawaii and urged families to prepare for the impact. Finally tonight, the beloved chaplain of Loyola University Chicago basketball team celebrates her 99th birthday. Yesterday, the team's head coach presented Sister Jean Dolores Schmidt with a number 99 jersey. We're told Sister Jean marked the occasion with friends and Loyola staff. The Catholic nun became a celebrity last March for her fandom and for praying before each game for her Ramblers and for their opponents in the NCAA Final Four. The Ramblers Guard describes Sister Jean as genuine, sincere, passionate, loving, caring, a sweetheart. And we wish her a happy birthday. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Join us tomorrow for more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.